Yeah, I will. Okay, so first, today's lesson we will learn about landing performance general principles, and these are the objectives. These are the aims and objectives. First, we will introduce the general principles of aircraft landing distance, and then we will define landing distance, identify two main components of landing distance, describe the forces that slow the aircraft after touchdown, and explain how weight, density, and wind affect landing performance. So what is your general background with landing performance right now?
I have a basic understanding of it in terms
Okay.
of looked at a few different things, and certain things in terms of I understand that we're heavy, it takes more distance and all those kind of things in terms of performance. Yeah.
Okay, that is nice.
Yeah.
That is good. And so let's move on. These are the general slides for
Okay.
this lesson, and you can follow along as I explain. So in general, landing distance is a measure from the screen height all the way to a full stop. So the screen height is 50 feet above the runway threshold, and a full stop means when the aircraft comes to a stop. So the whole distance makes up landing distance.
Okay.
And so can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what determines how much runway we need?
Until you come to a full stop, how much runway, how much distance you need?
Okay, and so that distance, is it the distance along the runway, or is the distance outside the runway as well?
It will be on the runway.
Okay. So in general, to explain a little more, for the landing distance, if you take a look at the diagram, there are two segments which comprise landing distance. One is the ground distance, and the other one is the airborne distance. So at the point where the aircraft is at the 50 feet above the runway threshold,
Two certificates.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so at the point where the aircraft is 50 feet above the runway threshold, the aircraft will be at a speed of VRAP. And from then on until the point where the aircraft touches the runway, that is the airborne segment. And beyond that is the ground segment. So these two segments make up the total landing distance. Any questions?
To be newcomer?
Yeah, you can participate along as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to know my level. Simulating a newcomer or experience?
Just a student who was able to participate. So moving on, so any questions you have so far?
So far, sure. It's okay. Both together, yeah.
And then we will look at the various forces that come into play that decelerate the aircraft. So the three main forces that we're going to look at is aerodynamic drag, brake drag, and reverse thrust. So as the aircraft decelerates, one of the main forces that stops the aircraft is the aerodynamic drag. So aerodynamic drag, it's basically the air resistance. As the aircraft flies through air, the air is resisting the aircraft. So that drag force is one of the forces that brings the aircraft to slow down to stop. The second force the second effect we're going to look at is brake drag. So brake drag is basically, it's mainly the wheels, the contact between the wheels and the ground. The friction between the wheels and the ground ground, that also reduces, that also decelerates the aircraft and causes it to stop. And so that force, that drag force, is known as brake drag. And also we have reverse thrust. Do you know what is reverse thrust?
I've heard about it. Not sure.
Not really, okay. And what do you think it is?
Seems like it's something that is giving you opposite thrust.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah.
That is a very good answer. So, in a conventional sense, the thrust is in the forward direction. The reverse thrust is in the opposite direction of the conventional thrust. We'll look more into this in another subject, but for now, this is good enough. So then moving on, we'll look at the factors that affect landing performance. So the different factors that affect landing performance basically are weight, density, and wind. So for weight, how does weight affect landing performance? Let me now explain briefly. If an aircraft is very heavy, it has to be at a particular VREF speed at 50 feet above the threshold. The heavier the aircraft is, the greater the VREF speed will be. And so the greater the VREF speed will be, the greater the ground speed at the touchdown will be. And the greater the ground speed, the longer deceleration distance required. So for high mass, you have a longer landing distance required. Next, for density. When we look at density, again, the aircraft will be at a VREF at 50 feet above the threshold. So at 50 feet above the threshold, example, it has at 130 knots indicated airspeed. For a high density, that equates to maybe an example 132 knots true airspeed. And for low density, it would be example 140 knots instead of 132 knots. So for low density, you have a much higher true airspeed. Much higher true airspeed also results in a higher ground speed at the point of touchdown. Higher ground speed results in a longer deceleration distance. So for low density, you also have a longer landing distance required. And the last effect we're going to look at is the wind. So wind, we have either a headwind or a tailwind. So for a headwind, in this example, we come in at 130 knots indicated airspeed. For a 10 knots headwind, you have a ground speed of 120 knots. And a 10 knot tailwind, you have a ground speed of 140 knots. So for the scenario for the tailwind, you have a greater ground speed at the point of touchdown. Similar to how we looked at it previously, when there's a higher ground speed at touchdown, you have a longer landing distance. So this is perfect. So clear about all three factors.
Okay.
And let me just look at what more that we need to cover. So we also need to look at this landing distance formula. This is something important that I did not go over. I will go into it now. So landing distance is given by this formula. Landing distance is equal to VREF squared divided by 2 times landing mass divided by braking force. And an important thing to note, what is VREF? What is VREF? So VREF is basically at the point where the aircraft is 50 feet above the runway threshold. The aircraft is at a particular speed, and that speed is called VREF. So that is called VREF. REF stands for reference speed. And something to note, the landing distance is, the formula for landing distance is the square of the VREF, okay? Usually for this formula, if they give you the various quantities, you just need to find the final answer. So this is for this formula on landing distance. This is something that it's important. So that is about all that we need to cover. And now we will look at a quiz to test your understanding on this subject. Yeah. So could you kindly just
Yeah.
complete the quiz? It's a very simple quiz.
Good. Okay. Ready? Hmm. I think that does.
Okay, let me have a look. Yeah. Yeah. And so for this one, I mean, this is quite tricky as well. And what is the definition of a force? I mean, so out of these, some options are, it's quite tricky because they are not forces. So, is option A a force?
Mm.
No, so this is out. Is option B, is option B a force?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this could be a possibility. Option C, is it a force?
Yeah.
And option D, is it a force? No. So this is definitely out. So based on option B and C, which do you think is the right answer? Aerodynamic?
Mm.
Right, yeah. So that is the correct answer. So in fact, C is the correct answer. So that is all for this lesson. Now let's look back at the objectives to see whether we have covered everything.
Yeah.
So the aim of this lesson was to introduce the general principles that determine the aircraft landing distance. I believe now you define landing distance. We identified two main components of landing distance. What are the two main components?
The airborne part and then the ground part.
Yes, correct. And we described the forces that slow the aircraft after touchdown. So the different forces, what are they?
The drag.
Three different forces we mentioned. We mentioned three different forces, three different drag forces. Do you remember what those three are?
The weight. The forces.
Yeah, the force. The three drag forces, remember? One was reverse thrust,
Reverse thrust, aerodynamic drag, and
aerodynamic drag, and brake drag.
braking.
Yeah, so these three are the forces that we looked at. Explain how weight, density, and wind affect landing performance. So this is also pretty clear. So we have covered everything, and so that is good. And I hope you enjoyed the lesson.
Yes.
Have a great day.
Alright, thank you so much.